Dissociation, a coping mechanism. The term dissociation was coined in the 1870s by Pierre Janet, one of the founders of the field of psychology. According to Janet's early definition, dissociation describes a mental structure that excludes overwhelming experiences from conscious awareness. In a general sense, psychological dissociation is considered the psyche's detachment from reality. Dr. Kluft defined dissociation as mental flight when physical flight is not possible. Kluft proposes that there are different levels of dissociation. The levels of dissociation range from no dissociation present to mild dissociation to moderate and severe detachment. When dissociation is not being employed by the psyche, an individual is alert and possesses conscious awareness of their body and its actions, along with awareness of internal and external reality, their inner and outer world. When dissociation is being employed by the psyche, dissociative experiences lie on a continuum from mild to severe disconnect. Dissociation is not considered problematic unless it negatively impacts quality of life. To be clear, mild dissociation is not pathological, but a common experience shared by most every person. Mild dissociation is a psychic coping mechanism used to tolerate, minimize, or master stress. Mild dissociation is detachment characterized by absorption, often seen in voluntary and enjoyable engagement in an activity from which the individual is able to easily disengage and resume alert consciousness. The detachment and inner absorption found in mild dissociation can be differentiated as reality absorption, like being immersed in a book or film, and fantasy absorption, like experiencing a daydream. In this mild level of dissociation, an individual is often immersed in an activity to the point that awareness is detached from external events, which can appear as a trance-like altered state. During mild dissociation, the individual directs their attention inward instead of outward, and accesses the capacity for internal imagery. However, despite heightened inner focus at the expense of outer focus, it's important to note that the individual is still flexible and open to experience, meaning they can switch attention easily. To understand mild dissociation, consider the tendency to zone out during a repetitive activity, or the experience of highway hypnosis, when, driving a familiar route, you're unable to recall part of the journey. In addition, dissociation can help give the psyche chance to pause to integrate new experiences, which is often seen in infants. The psyche of infants and children naturally employ dissociation more commonly than adults. Dissociation is employed by the psyche to relegate material from consciousness, to keep information from entering conscious awareness. The psyche employs mild dissociation to detach from awareness of parts of an experience. This detachment serves to conserve energy. The mind does not need to process all stimuli on a conscious level, so relegates much processing of stimuli to a subconscious level. Mild dissociation is a useful coping mechanism employed by the psyche. Not only does it conserve mental energy, it is employed to mediate stress and regulate emotional states, and help return an individual to psychic stability. As mild dissociation serves many regulating functions within the psyche, it can be conceptualized simply as a psychic self-care system. When dissociation becomes disordered, moderate dissociation. Dissociation has been described as mental flight when physical flight is not possible. Dissociation is an unconscious psychic coping mechanism, a response to the inability to tolerate affective tension. This emotional stress can be caused by traumatic instability, ambiguity, confusion, contradiction, generally any traumatic experience that confronts the individual with an inability to reconcile present experiences with their view of their own past and future. To manage contradictions, an individual's psyche collapses the experience into polarized opposites, resulting in the splitting of an experience between separate psychic parts. What is initially an adaptive survival strategy becomes maladaptive when employed as a conditioned response to any stressful situation. In time, the coping mechanism of dissociation can generalize to everyday conflicts, leading an individual to unconsciously avoid issues instead of actively resolving them in the present. This disconnect and avoidance can, in turn, perpetuate a sense of learned helplessness common amongst trauma survivors, promoting a feeling of an inability to affect the outside world. Therefore, although dissociation has adaptive short-term value to survival, it can evolve into a defensive coping strategy that becomes maladaptive and impedes daily functioning. When dissociation is employed to the point it becomes maladaptive, an individual may become focused on their internal world to the point that they are unable to deal with external reality. Such dissociation can generalize to any strong feelings, including pleasurable feelings and sensations. Long-term dissociation impedes mastery and resolution of traumatic experiences that gave rise to the dissociation in the first place. Instead of allowing acknowledgement and processing of traumatic events, dissociation keeps the trauma contained from awareness. Instead, dissociated traumatic material manifests as traumatic intrusions, intrusive imagery, physical sensations, emotional states, nightmares, rumination, and reenactments of the trauma. With dissociation, the spectrum of detachment ranges from mild to moderate to severe. Mild dissociation includes absorption and is neither pathological nor problematic. Moderate dissociation is characterized by a sense of depersonalization, in which an individual is so absorbed in their internal world that they experience a sense of unreality in relation to the self, body, and actions. Depersonalization is often accompanied by derealization, a sense that the outer world is unreal, along with identity confusion or uncertainty about one's own identity. Outside of research and clinical practice, the term dissociation is often poorly understood. Therefore, when discussing dissociation with clients, treatment providers often find benefit in using more accessible terms, like detachment and compartmentalization. Detachment describes mild dissociation's temporary disengagement from the world, in which an individual is focused on internal reality rather than external. Likewise, compartmentalization describes moderate dissociation's splitting, stopgap measure to preserve some sense of coherence and predictability, as this stability is the bedrock of the developing self in the face of contradictory relationship demands. A description of severe dissociation. Further along the spectrum of dissociation is severe dissociation. Severe dissociation involves extreme detachment and absorption in an inner world, precluding engagement with the outer world. Severe dissociation involves a greater disconnect from reality, including detachment from aspects of reality like sensory, physical, and emotional experiences, and even sense of self. This state of detachment is more chronic, instead of transient like mild dissociation. Severe dissociation is linked with dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, and dissociative identity disorder, all of which I will discuss further in later sections. Severe dissociation also involves compartmentalization, the rejection of certain experiences and the dissociation of those experiences into other psychic parts to preserve a coherence and sense of self. And this level of dissociation involves profound hypovigilance, or diminished awareness for external stimuli and threats, especially those related to past traumas, due to awareness being held instead by a dissociated part. With severe dissociation, an individual may be unresponsive or difficult to engage for long periods of time. When severely dissociated, an individual appears blank, as if catatonic or comatose, and may stare into space, sometimes for hours at a time. Upon returning from a state of severe detachment, an individual may feel a sense of coming to or waking up, accompanied by disorientation and no awareness of the passage of time. After experiencing severe dissociation, an individual may continue to feel detached for some period of time and have difficulty resuming normal consciousness. For some individuals, normal consciousness does not return until after a period of sleep. Severe dissociation leads to dysfunction. Although the lack of engagement itself may not be overly problematic, the level of detachment leads to difficulties maintaining everyday life. Time loss from severe dissociation is often problematic. Furthermore, while experiencing extreme dissociation, an individual may possess impaired judgment and is generally less able to cope with the outer world or resolve everyday conflicts. And that this state of detachment can lead to hypovigilance is worrisome, as a diminished awareness for threats related to past traumas is a risk factor for further victimization. Severe dissociation is adaptive when an individual is faced with an environment involving chronically overwhelming experiences and no physical escape. For example, such circumstances exist for prisoners of war, victims of human trafficking, and children raised in environments of domestic violence. Prolonged dissociation is adaptive when an individual is faced with inescapable distress, because dissociation is an escape when there is no other escape. As such, even severe dissociation usually isn't overly problematic until after leaving the dysfunctional environment for a more functional one. Only in a secure, stable, consistent environment does the system of dissociation and psychic fragmentation become maladaptive. To gain a greater general understanding of dissociation, a useful text is The Stranger in the Mirror, Dissociation, the Hidden Epidemic. Another useful general resource is The Body Keeps the Score. For a more in-depth understanding of dissociation and psychic fragmentation, consult The Haunted Self, Structural Dissociation, and the Treatment of Chronic Traumatization, and refer to The Inner World of Trauma, Archetypal Defenses of the Personal Spirit. In this video, I have discussed dissociation as a human experience and the factors that lead to dissociative disorders. In the next video, I will further define and explore dissociative disorders and explain how and why they are formed. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this video, and if you found this information helpful, please like and subscribe for more.